Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskaram. In the previous lesson, we learned how to render the Purvangam of the Varnam in the second speed, and in this let us see the Uttarangam, that is the Charanam and the Chittaswaram, how to render them in the second speed. First, the recap of the whole Charanam in the first speed. As I said before, we have to render only the Sahityam of the Charanam. Dani paine ru nai vela dani paine ru nai vela. First swaram. Da pa ma ga ri ma pa da ni da pa ma da ni pa ne na ru na I vela. Second swaram. Da ni pa da pa ma pa da ni da ma ga ri sa da sa ri ma pa da sa ri ma pa ma ni da pa ma da ni pa ne na ru na I vela da ni da ma ga ri ni da ma ga ri sa da ma ga ri sa ga ri sa ni da ri sa ni da pa da sa ri ma pa da sa ni da ri sa ni da pa da sa ri ga da sa ri pa da sa ma pa da ga ri sa ni da pa ma da ni pa ne na ru na I vela sa ri sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa da sa pa ma da pa ni da pa ma pa da sa ni da pa da ni da pa ma pa da ma ga ri ni da pa ma sa ni da pa ri sa ni da pa da ma ga ri sa da sa ri ma pa pa da pa ma pa da sa ma pa da sa ri ga ri ri sa ni da ri sa ni da pa da pa ma ga ri ma pa da sa ri ga ri sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa ri ma pa da. Now in this there is a difference in the rendering of second speed with regard to the Purvangam and the Uttarangam. In the Purvangam, what we did, after rendering the Pallavi, Anupallavi and Muktayaswaram in the first speed, the entire Purvangam was rendered in the second speed. But in the Charanam, there is a slight change in the order of rendering. Since we go back to the Charana Swara each and every time after each Swara, the method of doing the second speed differs here. That is, after rendering the first Swara in the first speed, the Charana line is rendered in the second speed, followed by the first Swara in the second speed, and then only we move to the second Swara. Unlike the Purvanga, we don't repeat the Uttaranga as a whole in the second speed. We have to do it alternately. So, after rendering the first speed of the first swara, Dani paine ru nai vela da pa da pa magari ma pa da ni da pa. Now the charana line has to be rendered in the second speed. Dani paine ru nai vela. Now as we saw in the Pallavi, when we render any one line in the second speed, it gets over by the half of the avartam. So the remaining half of the avartanam, we are going to render the first swara in the second speed. So Dani paine ru nai vela da pa da pa magari ma pa da ni da pa ma da. Now we have to go back to the first speed of the charan. Dani paine ru nai vela da pa magari ma pa da ni da pa ma da ni paine. Now this has to be followed by the second swaram in the first speed. Dani paine ru nai vela dani pada pa ma pa dani da magari sa da sari ma pa da sari ma pa mani da pa. Now again the charanam line in the second speed followed by the second swara in the second speed. Dani paine ru nai vela dani pada pa ma pa dani da magari sa da sari ma pa da sari ma pa mani da pa ma. Dani paine ru nai vela dani pada pa ma pa dani da magari sa da sari ma pa da sari ma pa mani da pa ma. Again the charanam line in the first speed followed by the third swara in first speed. Dani paine ru nai vela dani da magari ni da magari sa da magari sa gari sa ni da ri sa ni da pa da sa ri ma pa da sa ni da ri sa ni da pa da sa ri ka da sa ri pa da sa ma pa da ri sa ni da pa ma. Now the charanam line in second speed. Dani paine ru nai vela. Now with regard to the first swaram and the second swaram, both the first swara and second swara were of one avartam each, but the third swaram is of two avartas. So when we render it in the second speed, then that itself will take one avartam. For example, Dani da magari ni da magari sa da magari sa gari sa ni da pa da sa ri ma pa da sa ni sa ni da pa da sa ri ga da sa ni pa da sa pa pa ga ni sa ni da pa ma da. So if we render the charanam line only once in the second speed, then After rendering the third swaram, the remaining, that is half of the avartam will be remaining. So in order to avoid that, what we are going to do is, we have to render the charanam line twice in the second speed, followed by the third swaram in the second speed. Because as I said earlier, the melody and the talam should end simultaneously. We can't start the charanam line from Dani Paine Runai Vela. This is allowed only when you are rendering it twice, not for the first time. For example, if I render the charanam line only once and then followed by the third swaram, then I have to start it from the half of the avartam, which is not allowed. Dani Paine Runai Vela Dani Damagari Damagari Sadamagari Sagari Zani Rizani da Pada Sari Mabada Mabada Sari Rizani da Pada Sari Gadasani Padas Mabada Garizani da Pamada Ni Pain. We cannot do that. And after doing this, suddenly remembering that I have not rendered the charanam line twice, and rendering the charanam line in the second speed for the remaining avartam and starting the charanam line in the first speed in the next avartam is also not allowed. That is Dani Damagari Ni Damagari Sadamagari Sagari Sani Dari Sani Da Pada Sari Ma Dama Pada Sani Dari Sani Pada Sani Gadasani Pada Sama Pada Dari Sani Da Pamada Ni Paine Ru Nai Vela Ni, suddenly remembering it. So the sequence gets lost. So instead, what we have to do is, after the second swaram and the third swaram is rendered in the first speed, the charanam line is repeated twice. So the unwritten rule is, when the swaram is of one avartam, you can render the charanam line once. When the swaram is of two avartams, you have to render it twice. And for the fourth swaram, which is of four avartams, the same rule is applicable there, because we have even number of avartas. So when you have even number of avartas, you have to render the charanam line twice. So for the third and fourth swaras, the charanam line is rendered twice in the second speed. So we will start with the charanam line in the second speed for the third swaram. Dani Paine Runai Vela Dani Paine Runai Vela Dani Damagari Dani Damagari Ni Damagari Sadamagari Sagari Sani Dari Sani Pada Sari Mabada Mabada Sani Dari Sani Da Pada Sani Gada Sani Pada Samabad Dari Sani Da. Again going back to the first speed. Dani Paine Runai Vela, followed by the fourth swara. Sa Ri Sa Ni Da Pa Ma Ga Re Sa Da Sa Pa Ma Da Pa Ni Da Pa Ma Pa Da Sa Ni Da Pa Da Ni Da Pa Ma Pa Da Ma Ga Re Ni Da Pa Ma Sa Ni Da Pa Ri Sa Ni Da Pa Da Ma Ga Re Sa Da Sa Ri Ma Pa Ri Ma Pa Da Pa Ma Pa Da Sa Ma Pa Da Sa Ri Ga Ri Ri Sa Ni Da Ri Sa Ni Da Pa Da Pa Ma Ga Ri Ma Pa Da Sa Ri Ga Ri Sa Ni Da Pa Ma Ga Ri Sa. Now the charanam line twice. dani paine na runai vela dani paine na runai vela sa ri dani da pa ma ga ri sa da sa pa ma da pa ni da pa ma pa da sa ni da pa da ni da pa ma pa da ma ga ri ni da pa ma sa ni da pa ri sa ni da pa da ma ga ri sa da sa ri ma pa da pa ma pa da sa ma pa da sa ri ga ri ri sa ni da ri sa ni da pa ma ga ri ma pa da sa ni ga ri sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa ri ma pa da ni paine na ru nai vela. Now the ending of the Pallavi is only in the first beat. Da ni ending of the Charana. Da ni Can you repeat the sequence of the Charana, first speed and second speed? Dani paine. No, before singing, just repeat this. Just tell the sequence.
So the Charana line is rendered in the first beat once,
and it is also a tradition to render the Charana line twice at the beginning of the Charana. And some people also add some Sangadis in the Charana line. Okay, this is also a practice. For example, Dani paine na ru nai vela da ni paine na ru nai vela. After that, some people add Sangadi da ni paine na. That is visible, more visible in the Madhyamaka. Da ni paine na ru da ni paine na ru. These variations are done when we do the Charanam in the Madhyamakalam. But there is a tradition of rendering, that is when you do the Kirtana, all the Sangadis are rendered twice. Likewise, in the Varnam, there is a tradition of rendering the Charana line when you start the Charana twice, whether it is first speed or Madhyamakalam. So it is generally a tradition to render that. It doesn't have any connection with the number of avartas. Yeah, now tell that sequence.
The Charana line is rendered once. Generally, when we begin, like she said, we have to render it twice in order to get the idea. And when we are going to come into the first and second speeds, so we will render the Charana line once, followed by the first swara in the first speed. Then we will go to the Charana line and render it in the second speed once, and it will come to half avarta. So we will render the first swara in the second speed, which will complete the avarta. Then we are going back to the first speed of the Charana line. After that, we will sing the second swaram, which also consists of only one avarta. So we will render it once each in the second speed. For the third and the fourth Chittaswaras, the third one is of two avartas. Therefore, we will render the Charana line twice in the second speed and the swara once in the second speed. And for the fourth Chittaswara, which consists of four avartas, again we will render the Charana line twice in the second speed and the swara once in the second speed in order to complete the avarta. Regarding the first speed, every swara and the Charana line, they are rendered once each.
Yeah. Now we'll start off. We'll render the entire Charana and Chittaswara in the first and second speed alternately. That is, we'll demonstrate the entire sequence of Charana. Dani வேளத பத பமகரி மபத நீத பமத நீ ಧನಿ ಮಗರಿ ಸದ ಸಾರಿ ಮ ಪದ ಸರಿ ಮ ಪ ಮನಿ ದ ಪ ಮ ದ ನಿ ಪೈರೇ ನಾಯಿ ಬೇಳ ನಿ ಪದ ಪ ಮ ಪದ ನಿ ದ ಮಗರಿ ಸದ ಸಾರಿ ಮ ಪದ ಸರಿ ಮ ಪ ಮನಿ ದ ಪ ಮ ದ ನೀ ಪೈರೇ ನಾಯಿ வேளத நீத மகரி நீத மகரி சதா மகரி சகரி சனித ரீசனித பத சரி மா பத மா பத சானித ரீசனித பத சரி கத சரி பத சம பத கரி சனித பமத நீ பைரே நாயி வேளத நீ பைரே நாயி வேளத நித மகரி நித மகரி சத மகரி சகரி சனி தரி சனி த பத சரி ம பத சனி தரி சனி பத சரி கத சரி பத சம பத கரி சனி த பமத நீ பைனே நாயி வேள சாம் ரீசனி த பமகரி சத சாம் பமத பனி த பம பத சானி த பத நீ த பம பத மகரி நீ த பம சானி த ப ரீசனி த பாத மகரி சா தசரி மா பரி மா பத பம பத ச ம பத ச ரீ கரி ரீ சனி த ரீ சனி த ப த ப மகரி மா பத ச ரீ கரி சனி த ப மகரி ச ரீ மா பத நீ பைரே நாயி வேளத நீ பைரே நாயி வேள சாம் ரீசனி த பமகரி சத சாம் பமத பனி த பம பத சனி த ப தனி த பம பத மகரி நி த பம சனி த பரி சனி த பாத மகரி சத சரி ம பரி ம பத பம பத சம பத சரி கரி நி சனி த ரி சனி த பத ப மகரி ம பத சரி கரி சனி த ப மகரி சரி ம பத நீ பைனே நாயி வேளத நீ I hope you remember when I taught the third swaram, I said there is a connection between Sari Gada Sari Bada Sama Bada, which is not seen in the second speed. Dama Bada Sani Dari Sani Da Bada Sani Gada Sani Bada Sama Bada. We are taking each swaram from that position only. There is no Sari Gada Sani Bada Sama Bada. Then it becomes somewhat distorted. So we take it only when there is a lack of space. We take it from the actual swarasthanam. Dani damagari. In the previous one, dani damagari. We are not dani damagari. We are not actually doing the giving the gamakam for madhyamam when we descend in the fast speed. Dani damagari, ni damagari, sa damagari. If you carefully observe that, dani damagari, dani damagari, then there will be a what do you call as, actually it is dragging the speed, and also there is no stability when you render the gamakam in the descent. Dani damagari, then the ma becomes stable. Dani damagari, ni damagari, sa damagari. Rather in the first beat, dani damagari, it is a rounded gamakam. Dani damagari. If you visualize the gamakam, dani damagari, it goes in circles. Whereas in the second speed, dani damagari, ni damagari, it is actually linear. Dani damagari, ni damagari, sa damagari, sa gari, sa ni da re, sa ni da pa da sa re ma ba sa ni da re, sa ni da, sa ni da re, sa ni da pa da sa re da sa re pa da sa ma pa da. So every note is taken from that swarasthanam alone and not from the previous swaram, as we saw in the first beat. Now, with regard to the learning of Purvanga in the second speed, I told that we can render the Varnam in Madhyamakala. How to render that alone in Madhyamakala? So, in concerts, what we actually see that is the Purvangam is rendered in a Madhyamakalam, and after that the Uttarangam, when we go to the Uttarangam, the speed is slightly increased, but that is not proportionate. From the Madhyamakalam it is slightly higher, but when you take the concept of first speed and second speed, it is not the actual second speed, but it is slightly higher. We will render the entire Varnam in the Madhyamakalam, that is till Purvangam it will be in Madhyamakalam, and from Charanam we are slightly increasing the speed. But please remember, it is not the exact second speed, but it is slightly higher than the speed rendered for the Purvangam. Okay.
So the repetitions for Charana line and everything,
it will be only once. But as I said, the Charanam line, the first time when we start the Charanam alone, we are going to render it twice. In that we can give variation, because we are going to render the Charanam line for the first Swaram, second Swaram, third Swaram, fourth Swaram. So what you see in a concert and what you hear in a concert, it is slightly different from the practice of Varnam. Because normally when we learn Varnams, it is said that it is not advised to render any sangatis. For example, this is not allowed, because we learn the Swaram and the actual Sahityam for the Swaram. So when you render the sangatis for the Swaram, when you render the Sahityam, then the underlying Swaram becomes Sari, Gari, Pa, Maga, Sari. You can't have a Madhyamakala phrase in a Varnam. Whereas in the Charanam alone, there you have Karvai. That can be rendered as instead of Mahabharasa. You hear instead of sa, giving a Karvai at sa, we used to say render it as slight variation is allowed, but not, as I said, the Karvais cannot be filled up with fast phrases. These are not allowed. So there is no scope for sangatis in Varnams, and it is not advised to render sangatis in Varnams. You have to be careful when rendering the Varnam. It has to definitely match the underlying swara. Okay. The entire Varnam in Madhyamakalam That is Madhyam Kalam till Purvangam and slightly higher speed in Sharanam. Satra Sudanin Pori Chara Marulu Kunadira Girini Velayu Shri Venkatesha Karune Jayide Samayamusa Rigari Sari Sagari Sani Dapadari Sagari Gasari Dasari Maba Dadapamani Mabada Sari Sapamadapani Dani Padamapa Sari Mabadani Nidapama Pasani Dapa Dari Sani Dapa Madapani Dapada Sari Karini Dagari Sani Dadasani Dapa Magari Gari Sani Dari Sani Dapa Magari Sadasata Suda Dani Painena Runai Vela Dani Painena Runai Vela Dapa Dapa Magari Mapa Dani Dapa Madani Painena Runai Vela Dani Padapa Mabadani Damagani Sadasari Mabada Sari Maba Mani Dapa Madani Painena Runai Vela Dani Damagani Nidamagani Saramagani Sagani Dani Rizani Dapada Sari Mabada Mabada Sari Dani Sari Dapada Sari Gada Sari Pada Samabada Gari Sari Dapa Madani Painena Runai Vela Sam Rizani Dapa Magani Sadasam Pamadapa Nidapa Mabada Sani Dapa Dani Dapa Mapada Magani Nidapa Masani Dapa Rizani Pada Magani Dasari Mapari Mabada Mabada Samabada Sari Gari Rizani Darisa Nidapa Dapa Magani Mabada Sari Gari Zani Dapa Magani Rimabada Ni Painena Runai Vela Dani So, in the last 4 lessons, we have learned how to render the Varnam in the Catusram first speed, second speed, with regard to the Purvangam, Uttarangam, and in the next lesson, how to render the Varnam in Tishragati. Thank you.